Live part two. We are live now. So the craziest things happened. As soon as we went live the first time, her mic cut out and she couldn't hear me. So welcome to Revolution Network. This is Dr. Jason Dean, and I am with the most controversial but amazing lady on the face of the planet, Dr. Judy Mikovits. How are you, ma'am?
I'm wonderful, doctor. How are you?
I'm good. As people roll on, they're gonna be like, why did they jump on and then they jumped right back off? Because I think sometimes the powers that be shut some things off, and we couldn't hear her. She couldn't hear me, but we're here and we're gonna get out the truth. How does that sound?
That sounds great.
Awesome. Can you give everyone out there a nice little summary and a background on who you are and your expertise in the area you are, so all the new viewers can find out who you are?
The nice little summary is I have a PhD in biochemistry and molecular biology since November 14th, 1991. My first degree at University of Virginia in chemistry with a specialization in biology was in natural products chemistry. I've purified natural products as therapies. I've purified immune therapies like interferon alpha. I've developed treatments for HIV and retrovirus associated diseases at the National Cancer Institute. The last job there, I was director of lab of antiviral drug mechanisms. So my job was to make diagnostics and drugs in 1999 through 2001 for AIDS-associated cancers. So when these viruses destroy your immune systems, you develop cancers, opportunistic infections of other kinds. So I went into industry and followed some of those those environmental toxins which lead to cancers and the explosion of viral-associated diseases. I co-founded the first Neuroimmune Disease Institute to look at environmental toxins associated with autism and ME/CFS and many other neuroimmune diseases, autoimmune diseases. Found isolated and confirmed the transmission through the air of a new family of human retroviruses. Published it in then the #1 journal in the world, Science, on October 8th of 2009. And then when the firestorm started, when it was realized that the most likely way mouse contagious cancer-causing viruses and autism and ME-causing viruses got into humans was via contaminated blood supply and contaminated vaccines. So that's the long and the short of the shutdown of my work that started in 2011. The lengths, the depths, and the breadths that the government at every level did to me to keep me from telling the truth, or to dissuade me and to try to encourage me to bury the data that we found. That didn't happen, and that the reason for that is because vaccines are driving these plandemics. That's why we made the movie Plandemic, why the title. It was supposed to be prior to the release of our new book, Plague of Corruption. We wrote a first book in 2014, Plague, that shows you the details, the depth and breadth at the scientific level when we found these new family and many strains of viruses had been transmitted to more than 50 million Americans by way of contaminated blood supply and contaminated vaccines since the early 90s or late 80s, as the blood supply was contaminated, not only with HIV, but we now know with these other viruses that almost certainly were spread through humans by way of contaminated vaccines and blood supply.
You know what I have? I actually have, I'm going to show you something. I have a book that I think you might know a little bit about, and it's this book.
Yes, I do.
So this book, I went through chiropractic school, and I told one of my teachers who was preaching about obviously HIV and the dangers, and I debated her, and I beat her in a debate, and I showed her the video of Luc Montagnier saying that basically how we handle HIV is through nutrition, hygiene, and water. And you know what she told me? She told me, "You're a conspiracy theorist." Now, How does that stuff tie in? Because I know, and the Fauci stuff, I know this was all involved. Give me a little background on that.
Well, it all ties in because that was my first work, actually. Some of my first projects were in 1983. I first started working with Dr. Rossetti, the father, really, of human retroviruses, human disease-causing retroviruses, where he isolated the first human, he and Bernie Poise isolated and associated the first human disease-causing retrovirus with a very aggressive T-cell leukemia. So I started working for him on June 6, 1983. So this weekend marks our 38th anniversary. We're still talking to each other. We're still working together. So he said, "Oh yes, you must be here for our anniversary." So I will be. At any rate, we confirmed Luc Montagnier's isolation of HIV from the sickest of then what was called gay-related immune deficiencies. So what we learned over the course of the next 2 decades was that wasn't obviously, and this is what Peter Duesberg's book says and what my research, my PhD thesis said, that you can certainly have this infection, HIV, without having AIDS, without ever getting AIDS. But what happened then in the 80s was the plague of corruption started then, where other people, destroyed Peter Duesberg's reputation, tried to destroy Luc Montagnier and say, in fact, he was wrong and he didn't isolate the virus. That was Bob Gallo and Tony Fauci in the early 80s, where they were, that's when they started this plague of corruption about the disinformation and the misinformation that led, millions worldwide to blame, the victims of a virus that almost certainly spread through the world by way of the hepatitis B vaccine and other vaccines like the polio vaccine and other things. So in our book, Plague of Corruption, some of the later chapters are, how does this compare? Because what we said was, there was an African hunter. What was said was somebody got cut, the Cutter incidents. And this is also now in Charles Ortlieb's book about Tony Fauci and this corruption all along, not just Tony Fauci, but Bob Gallo. So this fraud was perpetrated, and you can see it in movies and books like The Band Played On, like the Dallas Buyers Club, where where people who were infected were prevented from getting the healing or preventative prophylaxis modalities and were scared into getting vaccines. So what was said was, if you were in one of those disease groups, if you were a gay man, an IV drug user, or a prostitute, retroviruses don't know the difference. If you were in the susceptible group because of your bad behavior, the only thing to save you is to get the hepatitis B vaccine. But they drove the disease with the vaccine, which was almost certainly contaminated through the early 90s with the XMRVs we isolated in 2009. So those viruses remained silent contaminants of the blood supply, of the polio vaccine, of the MMR, of many of the viral vaccines as we grew the antigens, we call it, the viruses for these live viral vaccines in these cell lines since the late 80s. That's when the liability was removed, 1986, when it's like, oh, these vaccines are unavoidably unsafe. No, they're not. And in that time, when then President Ronald Reagan signed the National Vaccine Injury Compensation Act, he declared that, there was no liability anymore for manufacturers. But at that time, HHS, when he signed that law, there was a compensation program that said some people will be injured. The most susceptible will be injured, and we'll compensate them. And we, the HHS, because it's a no-fault program, we took away all the liability. So the HHS, Health and Human Services, the CDC, the FDA, everyone else were supposed to be involved in we're supposed to be doing the safety testing since 1988. Well, of course, a year or so ago, Del Bigtree with the I Can Decide network, I see right behind you.
Yep, right there.
Yes, exactly. And Bobby Kennedy Jr. with the Children's Health Defense Fund, through FOIAs, through lawsuits over the last 5-6 years, quite a while, proved that the HHS had not done a single safety study. And that the last thing that Del Bigtree's I Can Decide won was a judgment from a judge that said the CDC has to take down on its website the notice that says vaccines don't cause autism, because they couldn't provide a single piece of data that shows they don't cause autism. So you see, we've been winning this, and it's the royal we. People who have been hurt by this a lot longer than me, and who discovered this. I only realized it, a decade ago, and really only in 2014. So when this book was in press, was August of 2014, was the first time I met Brian Hooker.
Yes.
And saw what William Thompson did. And oh, wait a minute, wasn't Ian Lipkin the debunker of Andy Wakefield? And oh, didn't our data show that in addition to autism, ME/CFS, and many cancers, the XMRVs were actually contagious in July of 11? And oh, in addition to that contagious aspect, our last study showed the strong association. Almost 30% of everybody with the disease known as ITP, a fatal bleeding disorder that's listed as a side effect on MMR, had evidence of the XMRVs. It's long been thought that viruses were associated with idiopathic thrombocytopenia. It's called idiopathic because the idiots don't understand the pathogenesis. But when we understood the pathogenesis and clearly showed in our scientific studies that 30% of all ITP is associated with the XMRV, the mouse gamma retrovirus infection, that were clearly human retroviruses. And that was June of 2011. June 1st was the last talk I gave with one of the world's experts in New York. That was the end of me. That was the end of because again, the United States of America, who gave liability free and have transmitted infectious, contagious cancer, contagious autism, contagious, that goes through generations, these retroviruses. That was the end of my career, and the big cover-up of trillions of dollars of damage worldwide had ensued. And that's really what COVID-19 is. It's going to be a cover-up of the injured that they've injured forever, and the mandates for even flu vaccines or COVID vaccines, should they ever appear, which we're fighting hard. The flu vaccine alone will kill those 50 million Americans who they've already damaged with vaccines in the injuries. More than 4 billion paid out in vaccine court. These are the people with mitochondrial deficiencies, with oxidative stress, with glutathione, with microvasculature leak. These are all the things that the vaccines will drive the injuries. Totally. And they will be the first to die, and they will be buried, called COVID-19. It'll have nothing to do with the coronavirus and everything to do with the cover-up, and that's why we called it a pandemic.
That makes complete sense, and I'm going to dive into that in just a minute, because I'm going to have you give them advice later on how this second wave is coming. But before that, now, I was researching you, and I've been watching a lot of your stuff, and I even pulled up a debunking article on Dr. Judy Mikovits, and as I was reading it, it was kind of hilarious because the things that they were saying. Now, when I first watched the segment on Plandemic, the first segment, and I looked through it, and I'll be honest with you, I got a bit emotional watching it because the amount of soul you have to do what you're doing today is beyond amazing. You're a patriot, you're a warrior, you're like everything, you're all the above. Now, they're claiming that you stole information. They're claiming a redacted study, all this different stuff. And now when you go on Google, if you Google your name, they absolutely destroy you from the letter A to the letter Z. And the first thing I thought of, and you can elaborate on this, is if Judy Mikovits is so wrong, then why aren't they suing her? Because they can't. That's why. Give me your viewpoint on that, because you're the most damned woman in the world right now, yet we all love you. So what the hell is happening?
Well, it shows you we struck a nerve, because I think they worked overtime to Wikipedia me up to be a horrible person. Nothing that's on that page is true. It hasn't been true since 2011. And in fact, we have had lawsuits filed and in play for the entire time, literally from the day I was wrongfully terminated for insolence and insubordination on September 29th, 2011. There was no arrest warrant at all 6 weeks later on November 18th when I'm arrested without a warrant. And here's Science, the journal itself, Science Insider, November 19th, 2019, the day after I'm arrested without a warrant, drug out of my home in shackles, held there for 5 days without seeing an attorney. Nothing was found in my home. Nothing was found in my friend's home, both of which illegally searched. And basically, at the end of the day, was, while I was held in jail, and the only thing I needed to free myself was to sign an apology, which was a confession that said I made up all of XMRV for my greater glory somehow, and I'd spend the rest of my life doing honest research. And of course, my husband said she'll never sign that, because she spent her entire life doing honest research, and she'll continue to do so. And I would have had to, as a part of that agreement, again, which was offered in March of 2012, when I proved my complete innocence to then the criminal lawyers, because there was no crime. I was arrested as a felony fugitive from justice. And you can go right to Science Insider at sciencemag.org, search Cohen and Mikovits, and you will see John Cohen, the criminal who defamed me, and the 23 articles written between the summer of 2011, when it was clear that the blood supply was heavily contaminated, and then further in 2014 that the vaccines were driving these viruses through the community and destroying millions of lives. Here's John Cohen saying, there was no warrant. There was no stole the notebooks. It was a felony fugitive of justice charge that basically came from one of the several federal agencies. Oh, Tony Fauci, anyone? NIAID, anyone? The government HHS who got caught. So between September 29th, when I'm arrested and both of my offices locked down, not one piece of data was removed by me, nor did I see any piece of data ever again. And this is what our two books walk through. They simply fabricated a crime. We filed a lawsuit. We have thousands of pages of data. We handed the FBI in the presence of my attorney in 2014. In 2012 and 11 and 12, we talked to the FBI. We talked to the FBI on 3 different occasions. We've had a whistleblower, it's called false claims lawsuit and it was held under seal, which means the government's trying to decide if they're going to take the case. And they usually take about 60 days to look at the evidence. They took 5 years. And they knew we had a case. My attorney, my criminal attorney, who I've paid more than $100,000 since I was forced into bankruptcy with a perfect credit score. I should say extorted into bankruptcy. I was told if I came to the damages hearing of this civil lawsuit, which was clearly fraud, which was clearly a bought and paid for attorney, and it's all described. I was told if I went to the damages hearing and brought my 97 witness list, 97 witnesses to the courthouse in Reno, Nevada, the minute I stepped out on that courthouse, the people who arrested me in the first place with no evidence, with no warrant, would find new evidence and put me away forever, and I'd never see the light of day again. When I complained to my then civil attorney, who refused to defend me and forced me into bankruptcy, he said, I won't go because you will be arrested again. And I said, and they will find new evidence. And I said, oh, that's ridiculous. There was no evidence. And there is no new evidence. And he said, there's no evidence. The first time was there. So we in this country can arrest a perfectly innocent woman, hold her in jail without any due process for 5 days while they plant evidence in my house. They planted the material they said I stole. And then they forced me, the minute I got out of jail, they called and said, you show up and turn yourself in the Monday after Thanksgiving or we'll come get you. And don't drive your car and don't get on a plane because you will be arrested. There was no warrant out for my arrest. What does an honest person do? Oh, I'm sorry. So I went in there because I did nothing. I didn't turn any material in. They extorted my husband and said, you'll never see her again if you don't show up with the material before whatever time, the Wednesday morning or the Tuesday before Thanksgiving, where we were supposed to go with our family. Nobody knew any of this. When American public wakes up and reads both books, which is why Plandemic matters, and realizes what this government, and it's not Trump. It's 5 administrations listening to lying SOBs at the heads of our FDA, at the heads of our CDC, prominently Tony Fauci, prominently John Coffin, prominently Nobel laureate Harold Varmus, who fraudulently added a synthetic clone to the so-called replication study to make sure we couldn't replicate it, make sure you don't get it. And when against all odds, we got it right anyway, because I wasn't allowed in a government lab. Tony Fauci stopped the study. $2.3 million. Do you think in the $1 trillion cost of COVID-19, do you think it might have been worth knowing if that $2.3 million, finishing the end of that study, the last 400 samples, which would have been proof, and we were lied to and the study stopped in order to cover up this plague of corruption. And it's the XMRVs, it's the contagious cancer, neuroimmune disease, ALS, Parkinson's, Borrelia, chronic Lyme disease. It's the contaminants, the adventitious agents in 40 years or more of vaccines, starting with 1934 in a similar, and that's chapter 5 of Playbook of Corruption, where we went from 1 in 10,000 cases, or the first cases of autism and MECFS in this country associated with the polio virus vaccine. That virus vaccine, the polio IPV, still carries those retroviruses to this day, and we inject without liability, without a single test, without a single word, into 2-month-old, 4-month-old, 6-month-old, and now Bill Gates is proposing it to solve COVID-19. Sure, it'll solve COVID-19 because it'll kill the victims you didn't kill the first time.
My belief is, and this is my belief, I can say this, is I believe it was population control from the very beginning.
It's clearly population control from the very beginning, and each pandemic from Zika in 17 to Ebola in 14, MERS in 2009. Oh, that's when our paper came out. How many of these contaminants? You know, they can't say coronaviruses aren't in flu vaccines and haven't been there for the last decades, because we make flu vaccines in avian cells, in chicken eggs, in dog cells. You know, these vaccines are killing the people, not these viruses. When you inject the viruses, you don't need infectious and transmissible. Our work showed infectious and transmissible. Back with Luc Montagnier and LAV. We showed back with XMRV, as Frank Rossetti and Bernie Poise did originally with HTLV. You know, every family of human retrovirus, we proved, as we, the scientific community, the honest scientific community, Luc Montagnier, us, proved infectious and transmissible, but infection doesn't mean disease. And infectious doesn't mean disease with SARS-CoV-2 and COVID-19. It's not that causing disease. No single agent causes disease. All you need to do is prevent immune activation, immune dysregulation in the most vulnerable. And those are the drugs that and the immune therapies. The very first was interferon alpha. This would have stopped all of this, and our corrupt FDA stopped the sale of interferon alpha back 4 decades ago. Don't use that in the feed of your animals. Hey, how do you prevent zoonosis? Oh, type 1 interferon. Oh, and the FDA stopped it. Illegally stopped it. So this is how we can stop all of this. It's been at least 4-decade plague of corruption, and probably closer to 7 or 8. And you're exactly right. It's population control, and the worst of it, it's the most vulnerable are the most vulnerable in our society. Are the gays, the IV drug users, the military. Oh yeah, you're military. You know, take the flag down, National Football League. You force don't pretend by flying things over the Super Bowl that you give a shit, because you force the military to get injected. You force the military to get injected. They're your victims. They're your guinea pigs. You inject dozens of unsafe vaccines, and it's killing them. And you prevent them and NFL players from using a simple food, a simple plant, cannabis, which can prevent any of this injury. And yet it's illegal. Oh, that drug. It's not a drug. It's a plant. It's a natural product that can heal all of this. And yet the government's held the patent on it since 2004. Held the patent and stopped everyone to use it. So just like we see in COVID-19, oh, we can't use hydroxychloroquine. Why not? It's not anecdotal evidence. That's what they said about peptide T. That's what they said about retinoic acid, which cures leukemia and lymphoma. Natural products, simple natural products. Oh, that's anecdotal. Or, oh, those studies were done in India or China. And, oh, of course, the science in India and China don't know. We'll just censor all that. And the only people that get to do science are the ones blessed by Tony Fauci and the corrupt granting industries and the whole corrupt everything about our journals, everything about everything, the funding to our universities, health insurance, everything about everything is corrupt, and it needs to start over, the reset today. And when we do that, everybody's going to wake up and realize they made us sick, and that's what they can't afford. Pay the debt. Pay what you did to us.
You're so much more fun in person than watching you on interviews. I love you because you get so fired up, and your memory and recalling all these things is so tremendous, which even more solidifies what is actually happening right now. Now, I want to clarify something, because a lot of people have asked me about this, and you're pegged now as the anti-vaxxer. Now, I would love to understand your viewpoint on that, because obviously I'm in the chiropractic profession, and I hate the word anti-vaxxer, but we tend to be non-vaccine people, but we believe the immune system actually works for a reason. Can you clarify this for people so that they understand your viewpoint on it?
Sure. So since 1980, when I purified the first immune therapy for cancer, infection-associated cancers, called interferon alpha. So My theory, the entire life's work that I've done is based on one idea, that we can educate the immune system with biological response modifiers, with natural products. We can educate the immune system to prevent and treat infectious disease and cancer. That's the definition of a vaccine. We've made more groundbreaking discoveries in immune therapy, in making vaccines. Peptide T, immune therapy, could have cured AIDS, could have stopped the progression of AIDS. A peptide that stopped the interaction between the macrophage and the T cell, that blocked that inflammation, that calmed the flame. Cannabis, now that we know there's a natural, an endogenous cannabinoid system. Dim the switch. It's the dimmer switch on inflammation. It's the terrain. It's not the infection. Heal the terrain, prevent the flame from going too hot. I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I'm like everyone else. I'm an ex-vaxxer, because what's been bastardized and called vaccine in our world has nothing to do with preventing or treating infectious or chronic disease, and everything to do with driving disease. And that's the change that happened in 1990.
That is so well said, and I appreciate that for myself as well, because that gives me a different viewpoint on it as well, and I'm going to go research that, because that's fascinating, and even our world in natural health is not always educated on that, so thank you for giving me a new field to go and study, because that's what we do and we love to study. Now, as we head into the end of this, we know at this point there's going to be a second wave. Now, I also know this is a designed second wave of quote-unquote COVID-19. But I also saw your video today that you're just coming out with now, knowing and being able to help people understand what to do and what not to do, because we're coming into an election and they're going to do everything in their power to shut this damn thing down before November. Tell us what the second wave really is and what they can do to prevent having a whole bunch of problems.
Right. Well, you said there's going to be a second wave. No, we can prevent that.
Okay, good.
It's not going to be a second wave. It's not a done deal.
Okay, good.
And how can you prevent it? Number one, take off the mask.
Yes.
Number two, go back to work. Number three, hug people, don't social distance, eat good, clean food, no GMO, no anything, no glyphosate. Do that to keep that out of your world. Keep yourself away from 5G, which turns on the flame. And absolutely, no matter what, don't get a flu vaccine or any vaccine this year. There will not be a second wave. No one will be able to call it COVID-19, because if you get a vaccine, you're going to have a fever. You're going to have symptoms. You're going to express coronaviruses, because the flu vaccines have coronaviruses. And the test doesn't work. It's cross-reactive. You don't use PCR for it. And if we all have antibodies, we're all immune anyway, which is what most of the data say. Healthy people don't spread disease. And the way you spread disease is through that mask. You immune suppress yourself with that mask. If you get the vaccine, it's even worse, because you've immune suppressed, you're a virus factory. So if we do nothing other than take back our own health and trust everything people like you and I have been saying for the last 3 months, look at everything they told us to do and do the opposite. Because if you do the opposite, you won't be sick. So the contract tracers can come to my door tomorrow and I won't have a fever. My husband with COPD will not have a fever. But if we get those vaccines, Prevnar, DTaP, nothing, no shots, because they will come to your house. That will cause you to express, that will immune suppress, you will have a fever. So, and then they'll call it COVID-19. But as I said, when we talked about when they arrested me and when they forced my silence for 5 years, they didn't have any evidence the first time, did they? So they didn't have any reason to call this COVID-19, because clearly SARS-CoV-2, that virus, has little to do with COVID-19. And they said it themselves. Oh, we're going to define it liberally. So if you don't wear your seatbelt and you're in a car accident, you died of COVID-19 when you went through the windshield. If you jump, this is it. Any old person who dies for any reason is called complications. There's no evidence in autopsies. There's no evidence in testing. RNA is not an infectious virus. They've done nothing to satisfy Koch's postulate that this agent causes this disease. And in fact, all the data suggests it doesn't, and so much more. This is a plague of corruption in a pandemic. So stop the pandemic the second time. Don't get the shots. The flu vaccine drove the pandemic, both in Italy and around the world. The vaccination programs, and it's more than just last year. It's every year. And most people recognize when I talk. Most people recognize, oh, wait a minute, I think I had that last year. I think I had that back in 2018 before the first cases. I had this horrible thing with the cough, and I went in and I got influenza tested, and I was influenza negative. Well, did anybody test coronavirus any year other than this year? Nope. And now all of a sudden, magically, influenza went away, and respiratory syncytial virus, and every cause of microbial pneumonia and any other cause of an upper respiratory infection. Those don't exist anymore, which the CDC has been lumping into flu, influenza, and every year saying 80,000 people died of influenza and less than 1,000 people test with influenza. And that's going to be true with with SARS-CoV-2. An antibody doesn't mean you've tested positive. It means you're immune. That's the standard they hold our vaccines to. And in fact, since they haven't done a single test since 1988, not one of their vaccines produces an antibody. So that's where you can stop and say, no more vaccines until you're testing, because you're driving these pandemics. So if everybody wakes up and says, no, thank you, I don't want that, I'll take my chances. I'm going to go out in the sunshine, get my vitamin C, go to my chiropractor, go to my doctor, keep myself well and away from any kind of inflammation, because the definition of SARS-CoV-2 is that cytokine storm. Don't give them any reason to raise a cytokine storm. Ferritin in the blood from 5G over 3,000 is the same cytokine storm as SARS-CoV-2. Protect yourself from 5G. Buy the protective clothing. Don't turn it on. Turn off the internet. Turn off the TV. Turn off the news. That's stressing you out just like the mask.
Beautifully said. In our last couple minutes together here, have you made any headway in getting your voice into the administration, to the president, knowing what's going on?
Oh, I'm sure. As quickly as they censor every word I say, we call it whack-a-Judy, because like whack-a-mole game, I just pop up somewhere else. Yes, we're sure the administration has seen it, and we're sure this is why the attacks, the baseless attacks in the fake news of Science, the Journal, of the Washington Post, of the New York Times. I mean, we're the New York Times bestseller list for 3 weeks, and they're not turning down the money. And same thing with Amazon. They can give us horrible ratings and say nobody likes this book, but tell Americans not to do something and they're going to say, what are you hiding? And that's why Plandemic, the second part of the movie, I'm sure the administration knows it, but what they need from you is all of us standing up and say no more. I will not take a vaccine that's untested ever again. You will not mandate one. And since none has been tested, we can call to President Trump to give us that 5-year moratorium. It takes me 5 years at least to test a cancer drug before we give it to people. I've worked on one therapeutic that would work in COVID-19 since 2004. We have pure data, clinical data. It's a fabulous drug, and the FDA won't approve it. So once we shut down the corrupt FDA, the corrupt CDC, the corrupt NIAID, and we start over and we put all the great people in, and there are great people working on this like yourself. There are great doctors. It's not the general doctor's fault, and that's why we're an education company. That's why I just keep talking, is because I only show data. And when people look at the data and when they read those 2 books, it's like, yeah, why hasn't Tony Fauci said a word? Why hasn't Ian Lipkin defended his corrupt Lipkin study, his replication study? Let's go toe to toe, Tony. Let's deny your emails. We got them all, and they thought they captured them all when they fired me on September 29th. Locked down my 30 years of work, and they thought they got everything. Well, they didn't think right, and that's the big I gotcha at the end of Plague of Corruption. So you could see we have all the evidence. The lawyers have all the evidence. The FBI has all the evidence. And as I Love You Lucy used to say, they got some splaining to do, because why did the government cover it up since 2014 when they had the terabyte hard drive that proves every word I say from these lawsuits that were held under seal, that were denied, where I was denied whistleblower status since I started filing the minute I was wrongfully terminated for preventing the misappropriation of taxpayer money.
So well stated. You're such an amazing human being. Where can everyone find you as we end off today? Where can they follow your journey, because you're going through an amazing journey?
Well, plaguethebook.com.
Yep.
Is one. Plandemicmovie.com.
Okay.
We keep getting it out there, and you can download it on your own computers and send it out. That keeps it from being censored. And then major booksellers, get the book. We're at Dr. Judy A. Mikovits on Twitter.
Yep.
So we tweet every day. We tweeted Christina Aguayo's beautiful interview from yesterday where we said some other things. So at Dr. Judy A. Mikovits on Twitter, at Dr. Judy A. Mikovits. If you don't put the A in there on Instagram and Twitter, that's a fraud saying I just love polio vaccines, and I don't. So so there are frauds out there. There are fraudulent accounts, but you know how to find me, and you know I answer Dr. Rosie, and I appreciate all that the good, most of America is good, hardworking doctors and scientists who only wanted to do what I wanted to do, which is simply cure cancer and prevent it from ever occurring. We have that opportunity, and we need to take it, and COVID-19 is going to give it to us.
And you absolutely exploded on Twitter. It was so beautiful to see. You were like going through the roof on Twitter. I want to thank you for being part of the Great Awakening and the healthcare system being turned upside down, which it should have been a long time ago. But thank you for being a warrior. Thank you for being a patriot. Thank you for doing everything you do. I'm streaming to 3 channels right now. I almost guarantee you some of it's going to get taken down. I have a copy now on my computer. We are going to spread this. But thank you, Dr. Judy Mikovits, for being who you are. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Dr. Jason Dean, for being who you are. We can't do it unless we all work together.
Absolutely. Spread this far and wide. This is Dr. Jason Dean with Dr. Judy Mikovits on Revolution Network. Have an amazing evening. Go follow her because she's going to another one right now, and we have to get this information out as fast as possible. Have a wonderful night. Dr. Judy, take care. Thank you again very much.
Thank you, Dr. Jason. Take care. Have a great night.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.